You know, when you look at a towering, like 100-story skyscraper, you naturally assume that the most dangerous threat to its existence would be something massive, like some undeniable, overwhelming external force. You know,
Right, like a hurricane or something.
exactly. A 9.0 earthquake, a direct impact from a massive object, or a Category 5 hurricane. We are just so conditioned to expect structural destruction to be loud and violent and forcefully obvious.
Well, it's funny because structural engineers will actually tell you the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah. The most catastrophic, irreversible failures in modern engineering, they almost never start with a bang. They start with a microscopic, like almost invisible flaw in the foundational blueprint.
Wow.
Just a single, quiet miscalculation about weight distribution or material stress that gets approved, and then it's buried under tons of concrete and entirely forgotten.
And for years or even decades, the building just stands there. I mean,
Yeah.
it looks completely fine.
Perfectly normal.
Right, functioning normally to the naked eye. But deep inside, the internal stress is compounding daily until one afternoon, the mathematical reality of that blueprint flaw reaches a critical breaking point, and the entire structure just simply collapses from the inside out.
Yeah, which is terrifying, but absolutely true.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that shift in perspective, from bracing for the loud external wrecking ball to forensically examining the quiet internal blueprint, is exactly the lens we are applying to our deep dive today.
We really are.
We are looking at a deeply comprehensive document for you today. It's titled The Mechanics of Truth, a framework of the unflicked word. And I want to be clear to you, the listener, we are skipping the Sunday school summaries here.
We definitely are.
We know the historical timelines, we know the characters. What this source does is strip away the cultural and religious varnish to present an architectural breakdown of human psychology, spiritual mechanics, and ultimate reality. It basically argues that the entire human condition is an epic cosmic conflict between two highly specific structural forces, the original word and the flipped word.
What's fascinating here is that the text doesn't approach this as some mystical or ethereal conflict. It treats it as an absolute, uncompromising science of motives.
Right, like actual physics.
Exactly. It posits that reality itself runs on a very specific operating system. So, step one of this framework establishes what it calls the original reality. In the beginning, the structural integrity of the universe is held together entirely by the Creator's word.
A blueprint.
The blueprint, yes. And this word has one defining, non-negotiable characteristic. It is designed explicitly and exclusively for the general good of all.
I want to pause right there on that phrase, actually, because the text repeats it like a load-bearing pillar. The general good of all.
Yeah.
It implies that the original design has zero structural capacity for selfishness.
Not at all.
Like there was no zero-sum game where one person's gain required another person's loss, right? But then the text introduces a concept that feels deeply abrasive to our modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
It claims that humanity's original likeness to the Creator was not about possessing autonomous, independent power. It was about perfect, unbroken dependence.
It directly challenges the apex goal of modern human development, which is, total self-reliance. I mean, we operate in a culture where autonomy is literally synonymous with freedom and maturity.
Oh, 100%.
But the framework flips that entirely. It suggests that the peak of human existence, like the original uncorrupted design, was a state of complete reliance on the original word, sustained moment by moment by the Creator's breath.
I have to say, I struggle a bit with that, honestly.
Oh, most people do.
Because perfect dependence sounds an awful lot like systemic vulnerability. I mean, if you are entirely dependent on an external force, you have no leverage. You are completely at the mercy of whatever you're depending on.
Right, but consider the prerequisite for that dependence, though. The text is very careful to establish the environment before it establishes the requirement.
What do you mean?
Well, if the word you are depending on is genuinely flawlessly designed for the general good of all, then dependence ceases to be a vulnerability. Right. It becomes a state of absolute, unbreakable security. In a system where the governing force is simply incapable of selfishness, having no independent leverage isn't a risk, it's the mechanism of peace.
That makes a lot of sense.
The text argues that in this original state, humanity's faith in the word was completely intact because the environment was structurally sound. There was no anxiety to self-preserve because the system was explicitly designed to preserve them.
So the blueprint is flawless. The weight distribution of reality is perfectly balanced. But obviously the building collapsed.
It did.
And this is where the framework introduces the adversary. but it does so in a way that radically demotes him from how he's usually portrayed.
Yeah, the source completely strips the adversary of all creative agency. It states unequivocally that this being, the serpent in the narrative, has zero capacity to generate reality.
None.
Right, he cannot speak a universe into existence, he cannot create matter or life or even a genuinely original thought. His singular mechanism of action is to take the existing, life-giving original word and just, well, flip it.
You know, I was trying to map this onto a modern equivalent for you listening, and the closest I can get is a malicious cyber attack.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Think about a hacker targeting a massive, globally integrated banking network. The hacker doesn't have the billions of dollars of infrastructure, the server farms, or the engineering teams to build a competing financial system.
They couldn't do it if they tried.
Exactly. They are entirely incapable of creating something of that magnitude from scratch. All they can do is write a few kilobytes of malware, just a tiny parasitic string of code that corrupts the bank's existing architecture. They hijack the system's own massive processing power and turn it against itself.
That parallel holds up incredibly well against the mechanics the text lays out. I mean, the adversary is literally a hacker operating within a system he didn't build and cannot replicate.
So he just exploits it.
Yes. He inserts a cognitive virus into the psychological operating system of humanity. And the malware is simply the question, did God really say?
So wait, if the adversary has zero original creative power, does that logically demand that every single lie, every deception, every piece of psychological or spiritual bondage a human being experiences today is just a hijacked, inverted truth?
According to this framework, yes. Absolutely. A lie possesses no independent substance. It requires the prior existence of truth in order to have something to distort.
Like a parasite.
Exactly like a parasite requiring a living host. But the most destructive part of this flip isn't just the introduction of incorrect information, it's the motive shift. The text argues that when the word is flipped, the motive instantly degrades from the general good of all to the selfish motive of one.
Wow. And that feels like the actual moment the structural integrity fails.
Yeah.
The introduction of the selfish motive of one. Because if you look at the mechanics of the narrative, the adversary didn't use a wrecking ball.
No.
There was no physical coercion.
Right. He didn't force the physical act. The text places immense weight on the sequence of events here. The actual catastrophic break in the blueprint happened internally, in the realm of belief and faith, long before any physical boundary was crossed.
So the fruit wasn't the actual problem.
The act of taking the fruit was merely the physical symptom of an internal loss of faith.
The moment they entertained the idea that the creator was actually operating on a selfish motive-like, that he was holding out on them, that the system wasn't actually designed for their good, the malware executed, the reliance on the system just shattered.
Yes. And this framework suggests that the selfish motive of one is the defining signature of the flipped word operating in any environment, even today.
Let's follow that thread because the implications are massive if we apply it to modern structures.
They really are.
If the original word is always defined by the general good, then any system, any ideology, or even human impulse that is rooted purely in selfishness is an active manifestation of this flipped word.
Whether you are analyzing a macroeconomic policy that legally exploits the working class to maximize shareholder value, or a political campaign built entirely on scapegoating a minority, or even a micro-interaction where a parent manipulates a child's emotions to maintain control, the underlying architectural flaw is identical.
It's all the same code.
Exactly. The DNA of those actions is the selfish motive of one. The framework elevates selfishness from a mere character defect to the fundamental physics of spiritual and societal decay.
It's like the moment you prioritize your autonomous survival or elevation at the direct expense of the general good, you are speaking the native language of the adversary. You are running the corrupted code.
Perfectly said.
But this brings up a massive mechanical question. If the physical bite of the fruit was just a symptom, what was the actual fatal disease humanity contracted in that instant? Because historically, people look at the narrative and say, well, they ate the fruit and then they died.
But they didn't.
Right. They didn't. They kept walking, talking, and building societies for centuries.
The text addresses this by redefining what was actually severed. It states that what was lost wasn't merely a geographic location like the garden or physical immortality. What was instantly fatally lost was faith in the word.
Faith.
Yes. Because the original word is the literal sustaining source of life, the power grid. to use your earlier analogy, disconnecting from that word through unbelief resulted in an instantaneous spiritual death.
So it's like pulling the plug on a lamp.
Exactly.
The electrical current stops the nanosecond the plug is pulled, even if the bulb itself remains physically intact and maybe even glows for a fraction of a second longer.
Precisely. The text argues that spiritual death strictly precedes physical death. The eventual biological decay of the human body and the entropic decay of human societies are just the delayed, trailing symptoms of that immediate spiritual severing.
Wow.
The flipped word inevitably brings destruction because it contains no life-generating properties at all. It is a closed system that can only consume.
And this leads right into what I found to be the most disruptive part of the entire document. The text uses this understanding of the flipped word to systematically dismantle our cultural obsession with dualism.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a huge paradigm shift.
I always assumed dualism was just a default feature of human religion.
Yeah.
But this framework completely rejects it.
The human psychological tendency toward dualism is profound. I mean, we naturally want to categorize the universe as an eternal, balanced struggle between two relatively equal, opposing forces.
Yin and yang, light and dark.
Exactly. A cosmic heavyweight boxing match between the creator and the adversary, trading blows throughout history. It makes the conflict feel epic, and more importantly, it makes our role in the conflict feel heroic.
But the text says the biblical narrative deliberately refuses to give the devil that kind of spotlight. It actively suppresses the adversary's profile.
It explicitly calls dualism a false concept. By demoting the adversary to a mere created being, a hacker who only operates via deception, the framework fundamentally alters the physics of spiritual warfare. The adversary is not the dark equivalent of the creator. He has no mechanical, structural power over the human mind or reality. His only power is the power to present a lie.
Just deception, no telekinesis, no forcing people into bondage against their will, just the presentation of a false reality.
Which completely redefines the nature of bondage. The text asserts that entities of falsehood, whether a culture refers to them as demons, jinns, or dark energy, do not operate by physically chaining a person. They do not possess the mechanical capacity to force human compliance.
So how do they work?
They operate strictly by maintaining an illusion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I keep coming back to this old story about how circuses used to train elephants. Have you heard that?
I think so, but go ahead.
So when the elephant is a baby, the trainers tie its leg to a heavy iron peg driven deep into the earth using a thick, unbreakable chain. The baby elephant pulls, struggles, and fights for weeks, but it's physically not strong enough to break the chain. Eventually, the animal's brain rewires. It learns a fundamental rule about its reality. The feeling of resistance on my leg equals inescapable captivity. It just stops fighting.
And then the animal grows into a 5-ton adult.
Right. And when it's a massive adult, the trainers can hold that elephant in place in an open field by tying a flimsy piece of twine around its ankle and attaching it to, like, a plastic lawn chair.
That's crazy.
The adult elephant could snap the twine and crush the chair without even registering the effort. It could walk away at any moment, but it doesn't.
Because it believes it's trapped.
Exactly. Because the bondage isn't the physical twine. The true chain is the agreement in the elephant's mind that it is trapped. The framework seems to define all human spiritual and psychological bondage exactly like this, as a massive agreed-upon illusion.
That is an incredibly accurate distillation of the text's premise. The source states explicitly, and I quote, "Spiritual bondage occurs when a person agrees with the lie."
Agrees with it. Wow.
The chains holding humanity down are forged from fear, shame, condemnation, and the primal anxiety of selfishness. But those chains possess zero structural integrity on their own. They only gain weight and power when the human mind and spirit consent to their reality.
That shifts the entire burden of responsibility, though. If I am bound by chronic feelings of worthlessness, the framework is saying it's not because a massive dark entity has overpowered me. It's because I have consciously or subconsciously looked at the flipped word that says you have no value, and I have basically signed the contract agreeing with it.
It places the battlefield entirely within the intellect and the human will. If you agree with the flipped word that demands you must hoard resources selfishly to survive because the universe is a zero-sum game, you are immediately bound by greed and anxiety.
The cage is built out of my own agreement.
Right. The entities of falsehood don't need to build a prison for you if they can simply convince you to lock yourself in a cell and swallow the key.
It's deeply empowering, but also, kind of terrifying, because it removes the scapegoat. I can't blame the monster under the bed if I'm the one willingly holding the door open for it.
Very true.
But this leads to a critical mechanical problem. If our chains are made entirely of lies that we've agreed to, how do you break an agreement with an illusion? Because from the inside of the illusion, the twine feels like an iron chain.
The framework addresses this by establishing what it calls the ultimate law. It introduces a very simple inverse equation. If the truth sets free, then a lie binds.
Meaning, deliverance isn't an exorcism or a battle of mystical willpower.
The text entirely rejects the need for magical incantations, complex religious rituals, or the obsessive focus on analyzing the darkness. Deliverance, according to this architecture, is a cold, structural reality.
It just happens.
It occurs instantaneously when truth prevails over falsehood. The text actually uses the physics of light to explain this mechanism.
Right. Light doesn't fight darkness.
Exactly. When you walk into a pitch-black room, you don't brace yourself for a physical altercation with the shadows. You don't try to sweep the darkness out the door with a broom.
That would be ridiculous.
Darkness is not a substance. It has no mass, no energy, no reality of its own. It is exclusively defined by the absence of light. Therefore, the moment light is introduced to the environment, the darkness doesn't retreat or surrender, it simply ceases to exist.
It vanishes because it was never actually there as a physical thing.
Right.
It reminds me of the mechanics of a nightmare. You're asleep. You're trapped in a terrifying dream where you are being hunted by some absolute monster. Your heart rate is spiked. You are sweating. The cortisol is flooding your system. The physiological reaction to the fear is 100% real.
Oh yeah, your body thinks it's happening.
But you don't defeat the nightmare monster by finding a dream sword and engaging in epic combat. You defeat the monster simply by opening your eyes, by waking up to the waking reality. The nanosecond you realize you are in your own bed, the monster evaporates. It loses all its power over your nervous system because it lost your agreement that it was real.
That is the precise mechanism of deliverance the text is outlining. The unflipped word of God acts as the light, or the waking reality. When a person confesses and aligns their mind with the truth, the illusion structurally collapses.
It shows.
And the text uses very specific legal terminology here. It states that by aligning with the truth, you remove the legal right of false entities to remain in your space.
I want to dig into that concept of legal right. It implies that the spiritual realm operates on a system of contractual consent.
A lie can only occupy cognitive or spiritual real estate in your life if you sign the lease through belief. The moment you actively recognize a thought pattern as a flipped word, when you say, I recognize this belief is operating on a selfish motive, it is generating anxiety, and it contradicts the general good, and you deliberately align yourself with the original word of truth, you are essentially tearing up the contract.
You're evicting them.
You revoke the legal jurisdiction of that false reality over your life.
But if the mechanism is this straightforward, if all we have to do is turn on the light and revoke the contract, why is the human experience so categorized by a profound addiction to the struggle? Why do we default to wanting to fight the darkness rather than just waking up?
This raises an important question, especially when we look at how humans process trauma and shame. That touches on the deep psychological resistance humans have to accountability.
Oh, interesting.
We often prefer the narrative of an epic struggle because it validates our suffering without indicting our choices. If my chronic relational dysfunction is the result of a massive, powerful, demonic attack, then I am a victim, and I am somewhat heroic simply for surviving the onslaught.
Wow. But if it's just my agreement.
Exactly. If my dysfunction is largely the result of me continually agreeing with a lie, if my chains are made of my own consent to a false reality about myself or others, that requires a level of personal ownership that is deeply uncomfortable.
We would rather fight a dragon than admit we're just sitting in a dark room with our eyes squeezed shut.
Furthermore, if you look at how modern clinical psychology addresses trauma and cognitive distortions, there is a staggering overlap with this ancient framework.
Like CBT.
Yes. Cognitive behavioral therapy is built entirely on the premise that our psychological suffering is largely driven by cognitive distortions, which are, in the vocabulary of this text, flipped words we tell ourselves about reality. The therapeutic process is a step-by-step unlearning of these lies, challenging them with objective evidence and replacing them with truth. The framework essentially takes this proven psychological mechanism and elevates it to a universal cosmic law.
Okay, turning on the light makes sense in theory. Unlearning the cognitive distortion makes sense. But here's the massive problem we run into, We are operating in a world that is completely saturated by the flipped word.
Completely saturated.
Selfish motives is the default operating system of global economics, politics, and media. So if we're supposed to just align with the truth to break the illusion, how do we know what the truth actually is? What are the undeniable, objective proof that the original word is actually good and not just another manipulation by some higher power?
That question brings us to the theological climax of the text's architecture. The framework posits that the incarnation, Jesus Christ, entering the human reality, was the original Word made flesh. His exclusive purpose was to reverse the specific architectural failure that occurred in Eden. And we have to remember, the failure wasn't just a broken rule.
Right.
The failure was a loss of faith regarding the motive of the Creator.
The foundational lie was that the Creator is a selfish tyrant holding out on humanity.
Correct. So, to restore faith, the Word had to provide an undeniable historical counter-argument. The text addresses the event of the cross and the concept of the blood of the Lamb, but it makes a profoundly disruptive distinction regarding the mechanics of the crucifixion.
What's the distinction?
It explicitly rejects the idea that the cross was a magical transaction designed to appease an angry, bloodthirsty God.
Which is huge, because that transactional view, often called penal substitutionary atonement, is how millions of people, historically and currently, understand it. This idea of like cosmic child abuse, where a furious deity demands a blood sacrifice to calm his wrath before he can forgive humanity.
The text structurally rejects that interpretation because it recognizes that painting the Creator as an angry deity demanding blood sounds suspiciously like a flipped word.
It totally does.
It reinforces the very lie the adversary used in the garden, that God is a tyrant whose default posture toward humanity is hostility. Instead, the framework argues that the cross was the ultimate physical manifestation of truth required to shatter that specific foundational lie.
But how does the physical death accomplish that?
By providing objective, unalterable proof of motive. If the adversary's claim is that the Creator is fundamentally selfish, the only way to structurally dismantle that lie is to demonstrate ultimate selflessness.
So he yields his life.
By willingly yielding his life, the Word made flesh shatters the illusion of the selfish tyrant. It establishes in historical time and space that the core nature of God is agape love, a selfless, sacrificial love dedicated entirely to the general good of all. The text presents this historical event as the objective truth.
So the cross is the ultimate legal evidence entered into the cosmic record.
Yes.
It's the counter-argument that cannot be debated.
Yes, it is the objective truth. But the framework doesn't stop there. It insists that objective truth alone is not enough to secure deliverance for the individual. It cites Revelation 12:11, stating that the accuser is overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony.
I want to push back on the phrasing the text uses here when it refers to the testimony as subjective truth. Because in our current cultural vernacular, subjective truth is almost a pejorative.
It definitely is.
Right. When someone says my subjective truth, they usually mean my personal opinion or my feelings, implying that truth is fluid and relative to the observer. But based on the rigorous architectural logic of this document, that can't be what it means.
It means something entirely different. The text is not advocating for moral or factual relativism. In the context of this courtroom dynamic, subjective truth means embodied truth.
Embodied truth.
Yes, it is the lived empirical experience of the individual. If the objective truth is the law written in the Constitution, the subjective truth is the eyewitness taking the stand in the courtroom.
Okay, that clarifies it. The believer is taking the stand.
Exactly. The individual stands before the accuser and says, I have personally experienced the application of this objective truth. I was blind to reality, and now I see it. I was structurally bound by the illusion of fear, and by aligning with the original word, I am now free.
So what does this all mean? It requires both halves of the equation.
It does.
The devil whispers the flipped word. God is a tyrant. The universe is a zero-sum game, and you are worthless. The human mind counters by pointing to the objective truth. The historical evidence of the cross proves the Creator is perfectly selfless. And then they point to their subjective truth. And the undeniable evidence of my transformed life proves that this selflessness works in reality. It forms an airtight legal defense.
Case closed. When a human being speaks their lived, embodied experience of the truth, it generates a legal and spiritual declaration that the flipped word simply has no mechanism to counter. You cannot argue against a transformed life.
Right.
And this specific courtroom dynamic leads the text into a scathing critique of modern religious systems and leadership.
Oh, yes. The text goes hard after what it calls religious entertainers.
The critique is perfectly aligned with the structural logic we've been discussing. The text argues that because this quiet legal dynamic of embodied truth is what actually dismantles the adversary's lies, the world has absolutely no need for religious entertainers. It does not need self-glorifying leaders or manipulators who manufacture emotional highs or institutions built on charismatic personalities. It categorizes these leaders as wolves in sheep's clothing.
Because even if they are using all the correct religious vocabulary, their underlying motive is flipped. If a leader is seeking fame, expanding their personal wealth, or maintaining psychological control over a congregation, they are operating on the selfish motive of one.
Yes.
They are running the malware while wearing a name tag that says original word.
Exactly. The underlying architecture is corrupt. What the text says the world desperately requires instead are truth bearers.
Truth bearers. That phrase implies a physical carrying of something weighty. What does a truth bearer actually look like in practice, according to this framework?
A truth bearer is an individual who relies solely on the structural power of the unflipped word. They don't need a massive platform, a microphone, or the ability to manipulate a crowd's emotions.
So they're quiet.
Often, yes. Consider the immense quiet bravery required for this role. A truth bearer walks into a system deeply corrupted by the selfish motive, perhaps a highly toxic corporate boardroom, a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic, or a corrupt political institution. They do not enter to argue, scream, or forcefully dismantle the opposition.
What do they do?
They simply enter the space and introduce the light of selflessness and objective truth through their presence and their actions.
They just turn on the light in the dark room.
And according to the absolute laws of this framework, when that light is introduced, the darkness, the structural illusions built on selfishness, has no choice but to begin collapsing.
It's a remarkably quiet, almost stoic picture of spiritual authority. It's not about shouting louder than the lie. It's about standing firmly on the blueprint of reality. It's the ultimate expression of faith, simply saying, I don't need to wrestle this illusion. I just need to persistently declare the reality until the illusion evaporates.
That's a great way to put it.
But this brings us to the final mechanical question. We have the objective proof of the cross, and we have the subjective power of the testimony. But how does this process complete the cycle? How do we actually get back to the state described in step 1 before the blueprint was hacked? This introduces the final motif of the document, which revolves entirely around the concept of breath.
The text highlights a profound literary and theological chiasmus, a perfect symmetry that spans the entire historical narrative from Genesis to the 1st century.
Symmetry is always so satisfying.
It is. In the opening scenes of Genesis, the text reminds us that the Creator formed humanity and breathed the breath of life into them. This breath was the active, sustaining current that allowed humanity to exist in perfect, peaceful dependence on the Word.
Then the malware is introduced, the faith is broken, and that life-giving connection is severed. Fast forward thousands of years to the event of the cross.
On the cross, Jesus, whom the framework identifies as the last Adam, yields his physical breath. He literally exhales his final breath into the atmosphere to finalize the defeat of the flipped word, paying the ultimate structural price of total selflessness.
Wow.
But the narrative architecture doesn't end in the grave. In John chapter 20, following the resurrection, the text highlights a highly specific action. Jesus appears to his followers in a closed room. He doesn't give them a new set of rules. He doesn't give them a theological textbook. He physically breathes on them.
He breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. The symmetry is almost staggering when you map it out. It's like a massive sprawling symphony, where the final movement perfectly mirrors the opening chords, but with the entire central dissonance fully resolved.
Beautifully said.
The Creator breathes life in a perfectly safe garden. Humanity breaks the trust and loses the breath. The Creator enters the compromised system, yields his own breath to absorb the consequence of the malware, and then, having rebooted the system, breathes that exact same uncorrupted life back into humanity.
It is the flawless closing of the architectural circle. The text defines the Holy Spirit within this framework as the eternal breath of God. But it is crucial to analyze the character of this breath. The text heavily stresses that the Spirit exists in a state of perfect dependence on the Word. He exists solely to glorify the Word, never drawing attention or power to himself.
Which structurally makes the Holy Spirit the ultimate cosmic antithesis of the flipped word.
Exactly.
If the flipped word is defined entirely by this selfish motive of one, constantly demanding attention, power, and autonomy, the eternal breath is defined by pure, unadulterated selflessness. It functions like the autonomic nervous system of the spiritual life, sustaining the body perfectly without ever demanding conscious recognition.
Precisely. And this is how the text concludes that the original likeness of God is finally restored in a human being. By aligning with the truth and revoking the legal rights of the lies, a person makes space to receive this eternal breath back into their internal architecture.
But wait, we have to circle all the way back to the abrasion we felt in step 1. This restored likeness is not achieved by granting the human being autonomous, independent, godlike power.
No, it's not.
Which, ironically, was the exact promise the hacker made in the garden. If you eat this, you will be like God. The adversary sold them the lie that likeness equaled independence.
The devastating lie was that autonomy was the peak of existence. The framework concludes that true likeness to the Creator means being fully indwelt, sustained, and guided by the unflipped word and the eternal breath.
I'm trying to process the sheer weight of what that means for how we live today. If the ultimate structural goal of human existence, the absolute peak of our design, is perfect dependence on a perfectly selfless Creator, doesn't this entirely reframe our modern obsessive pursuit of independence?
It absolutely does.
It's the very thing we are all exhaustingly striving for: total self-reliance, building our own empires, needing no one, actually just the lingering chronic disease of the flipped word.
That is exactly the challenging, unavoidable conclusion this architectural framework demands. If independence inherently requires disconnecting from the source of life in order to operate on a selfish motive, then independence is merely a culturally acceptable synonym for spiritual death.
That is profound.
True, structural freedom, according to this text, is only found in total, trusting surrender to the truth.
It distills the entirety of human history and personal psychology down to a binary choice. The final summary of the document lays it out without any ambiguity. The original word is defined as truth, life, the general good, and selfless love.
Yes.
The flipped word is defined as the lie, death, the selfish motive, and deception. Humanity's architecture collapsed by agreeing with the flip. The architecture is restored because the Creator manifested the original word in physical reality, provided the undeniable objective proof of his selfless love, and restored the breath to anyone willing to break their agreement with the illusion.
And the final, highly practical instruction the text offers is this. You defeat the adversary not by obsessing over him, not by analyzing the darkness, and not by fighting the shadows.
Right.
You defeat the adversary by anchoring yourself entirely in the truth, bearing witness to it in your daily life, and simply allowing the light to expose and dissolve the darkness.
It provides the blueprint for a profoundly peaceful, deeply confident existence. You don't have to spend your days jumping at shadows looking for demons around every corner, or burning yourself out trying to forcefully dismantle evil systems on your own.
No, you don't.
Your only structural requirement is to maintain the integrity of your own internal blueprint. Just turn on the light, stand in the objective truth.
Whether one approaches this document from a deeply held theological worldview or purely as an analytical learner examining the ancient narrative structures of human psychology, the profound utility of this concept cannot be overstated.
I completely agree.
The dichotomy between the flipped word of selfish motive and the unflipped word of the general good offers a vital, razor-sharp lens for diagnosing almost all human behavior, societal conflict, and internal mental struggle today.
We have covered a massive amount of intellectual and spiritual ground today. For you listening, we moved from the serene, original reality of perfect dependence through the cunning, malware-like manipulation of the flipped word. We explored the deeply psychological illusion of spiritual bondage, analyzed the undeniably legal courtroom triumph of the cross, and finally arrived at the beautiful, poetic symmetry of the restored breath.
It's an incredible journey.
And as we prepare to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final lingering thought, a structural diagnostic question to mull over as you go about the rest of your week, as you navigate your workplace, as you scroll through your media feeds, and as you listen to your own internal monologue.
It's a good one.
If the ultimate foundational strategy of the adversary is simply to ask, did God really say? And to present a flipped word based entirely on the selfish motive of one, where in your modern everyday life are you unknowingly accepting these illusions? Where in our corporate cultures, our political discourse, or even our own self-help routines are we swallowing flipped words that have been perfectly, beautifully disguised as self-empowerment or autonomy? Structure. A microscopic flaw in the blueprint was accepted as normal, and the internal stress built up until the collapse was mathematically inevitable. Check your blueprints. Examine the underlying motives of the words you're using to build your reality. Are they the original word of life and the general good? Or are they the flipped word of selfish motive, quietly waiting to tear the structure down from the inside out? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the architecture of reality. Keep seeking the truth, keep asking the deep, structurally vital questions, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.